You know what's funny about revenge? It tastes exactly like betrayal, only colder. I should know. I've been savoring both for 3 years now, and neither one gets easier to swallow. Before I tell you this story, and trust me, you're going to want to hear every word, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to share happened right here in suburban Phoenix, but I have a feeling that deceit and family drama know no borders. I bet some of you have lived through something remarkably similar. My name is Carmen Rivera, and at 68 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of heartbreak this world had to offer. I buried my husband after 32 years of marriage. I raised 3 children as a single mother while working double shifts at the hospital. I survived cancer twice, bankruptcy once, and more family drama than a telenovela. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the phone call I received on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 years ago. I was tending to my garden, the one thing that still brought me peace in those quiet years of my supposed golden age. My roses were blooming early that year, deep red buds that reminded me of my mother's lipstick. The Arizona sun was already getting warm, even at 9 in the morning, and I was debating whether to water them again when my phone rang. It was my daughter Sophia. My baby girl, though she was 34 and hadn't been my baby for a very long time. She was calling from Denver, where she'd moved after college to work for some tech company I never quite understood. We talked maybe once a week, sometimes less. Not because we didn't love each other, we did, fiercely, but because life has a way of creating distance even between the people who matter most. Her voice was different that morning. Higher, breathless, like she was running or maybe just running on pure adrenaline. "Mom," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice before she even got to the news. "Mom, I have something incredible to tell you." I set down my watering can and found myself holding my breath. In my experience, incredible news from your adult children falls into 2 categories: babies or marriage. Since Sophia had never shown much interest in either, I wasn't prepared for what came next. "I'm engaged, Mom. I'm getting married." The words hit me like ice water. Not because I wasn't happy for her. I was, of course I was, but because this was the first I was hearing of anyone serious in her life. Sophia had always been private about her relationships, but this felt different. This felt sudden. Engaged. I managed, sinking into the wrought iron chair on my patio. "Honey, I didn't even know you were seeing someone." She laughed, that nervous laugh she'd had since she was 12 and trying to explain why she'd failed her math test. I know. It's been kind of a whirlwind. His name is Diego, and Mom, he's incredible. He's from Colombia originally, but he's been here for a few years now. He's smart, he's funny, he treats me like a queen. I've never been happier. Diego. The name rolled around in my mind like a marble in an empty jar. A Colombian. I felt something twist in my stomach, though I couldn't name it then. It wasn't racism. I'd married a Rivera, after all, and my own heritage was proudly Mexican. It was something else. Something that felt like intuition wrapped in maternal anxiety. "That's wonderful, Mija," I said, using the endearment I'd called her since birth. "Tell me about him. How did you meet?" What followed was a 20-minute monologue that felt rehearsed. They'd met at a coffee shop near her office. He was getting his MBA at University of Denver. He spoke 3 languages. He cooked. He loved hiking. He wanted kids someday. He made her laugh. Every detail sounded perfect, which is exactly what made my skin crawl. But I played the supportive mother because that's what you do. I asked the right questions, made the appropriate excited noises, and told her how happy I was for her. Because I was happy for her, or I wanted to be. My daughter deserved love, deserved someone who would cherish her the way her father had cherished me. "There's something else, Mom," Sophia said, and her voice dropped to that conspiratorial tone she'd used as a child when she wanted something. "We want you to meet him. Actually, we want his parents to meet you too. They're visiting from Bogota next month, and we thought we could all have dinner together. Like a big family meeting." My heart started beating faster. His parents are coming from Colombia. Yes, isn't that wonderful? They're so excited to meet me, and when I told Diego about you, he insisted that everyone meet. He says family is everything to him. Family is everything to him. The words should have warmed me, but instead they felt like a warning I couldn't yet decipher. We talked for another few minutes about dates and details. They wanted to come to Phoenix for the dinner, neutral territory, Sophia said with another nervous laugh. I could cook, she suggested. Maybe some traditional Mexican food, since Diego's family would appreciate the cultural connection. After we hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, staring at those red roses. There was something about the whole conversation that felt off, like a song played in the wrong key. But I couldn't put my finger on what exactly bothered me. Maybe it was just the shock of sudden news. Maybe it was the natural worry that comes with watching your child make such a big decision. Maybe it was the way Sophia had sounded so unlike herself. Too bright, too eager, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. That night, I called my sister Elena in Tucson. Elena was 2 years older than me and had always been the practical one in our family. She'd married young, stayed married, and raised 4 kids who all lived within 20 miles of her house. She was the kind of woman who kept her opinions to herself until asked, and then delivered them with surgical precision. She's bringing him and his parents to meet you, Elena said after I'd filled her in. That seems fast. That's what I thought. How long has she been with this man? I realized with uncomfortable clarity that I didn't actually know. She didn't say exactly. A few months, maybe. Elena was quiet for a moment. I could hear her TV in the background, probably one of her crime shows. She was addicted to those programs about people who disappeared or were murdered by their spouses. Carmen, she finally said, trust your gut on this one. If something feels wrong, it probably is. But here's the thing about gut feelings, they're easy to ignore when you desperately want to be wrong. I wanted Sophia to be happy. I wanted to believe that love could happen quickly, that some people just know when they've found their person. I wanted to trust my daughter's judgment and celebrate this new chapter in her life. So I pushed aside my doubts and started planning. I spent the next 3 weeks researching Colombian food, buying new dishes, and preparing for what I hoped would be a beautiful family dinner. I practiced Spanish phrases I hadn't used in years, wanting to make Diego's parents feel welcome. I bought a new dress, got my hair done, and even splurged on fresh flowers for the dining room. I should have listened to Elena. I should have trusted that cold feeling in my stomach. But sometimes the worst betrayals come disguised as the things we most want to believe. 3 weeks later, they all arrived at my house on a warm Saturday evening in April. Sophia looked radiant in a way I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. She'd lost some weight, done something different with her hair, and had that glow that people in new relationships always seem to carry. Diego was exactly what I'd expected and nothing like I'd prepared for. He was handsome in that careful way that some men cultivate, perfectly styled hair, expensive casual clothes, a smile that looked like it had been practiced in the mirror. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but not too firm, his eye contact steady but not aggressive. Everything about him felt calculated, though I couldn't have said why. Mrs. Rivera, he said, and his English was perfect, barely accented. It is such an honor to meet you. Sophia talks about you constantly. His parents were older than I'd expected, probably in their 70s, and they seemed genuinely warm. His mother, Isabel, brought me a beautiful scarf from Bogotá, and his father, Roberto, complimented my garden. They spoke limited English, but their smiles were genuine, and I found myself liking them immediately. We had cocktails on the patio while I finished preparing dinner. The conversation flowed easily, Diego translating between his parents and me, Sophia glowing with happiness, everyone laughing at the right moments. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful, and I started to relax for the first time since that initial phone call. That was my first mistake. Because what happened next would shatter not just my trust, but my daughter's entire future. And 3 years later, I'm still living with the consequences of the choice I made that night. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how perfect everything seemed before it all went to hell. Because that's how the best revenge stories always start, with the moment when you think everything is going to be okay. If you've ever been a mother, you know that feeling when something is wrong with your child but you can't quite name what it is. It's like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. You know something's there, but every time you reach for it, it slips away. That's exactly how I felt watching Sophia and Diego together during those first few hours. And if this story is resonating with you, if you've ever had that gut feeling about someone your loved one brought home, hit that subscribe button. Because I have a feeling we're going to be in this together for the long haul, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Don't get me wrong, they looked happy. Diego was attentive, pulling out Sophia's chair, refilling her wine glass before she had to ask, laughing at her stories. But there was something performative about it all, like watching actors who knew their lines perfectly but hadn't quite found their characters. I noticed the small things first. The way Diego's eyes would flick around the room when he thought no one was watching, cataloging everything like he was taking inventory. How he asked seemingly casual questions about the neighborhood, the house, my late husband's business. Questions that felt innocent enough on the surface but added up to something that made my shoulders tense. "This is such a beautiful home, Mrs. Rivera," he said while we were still on the patio. "Roberto, my father, he notices that you have very nice things. He asks if your husband, God rest his soul, was he successful businessman?" The question was translated through Diego's father, but I caught the subtle shift in phrasing. Roberto had asked something in Spanish, and Diego's English translation felt edited, polished. But I smiled and answered anyway, explaining that my husband had owned a small construction company that had done well during the housing boom in the early 2000s. Diego nodded thoughtfully. "And Sophia, she will inherit all of this someday, yes? In our culture, it is important to know that family is secure." There it was again, that feeling like someone walking over my grave. The question was reasonable enough, the kind of thing families discuss. But coming from a man I'd known for 2 hours, it felt presumptuous. Calculating. Sophia must have seen something in my expression because she quickly changed the subject, asking about the tamales I was preparing. But I caught her shooting Diego a look, not angry, but warning. Like she was telling him to dial it back. That's when I started really watching them. And what I saw troubled me more than I wanted to admit. Sophia was different around him. Smaller. Somehow. She'd always been confident, even as a child, the kind of girl who raised her hand first in class and never backed down from an argument. But sitting next to Diego, she seemed to defer to him constantly. When he spoke, she watched his face like she was reading instructions. When he made a joke, she laughed a beat too quickly. When he touched her arm, she went very still, like she was afraid of disappointing him. It reminded me of something, though I couldn't place what. A memory from years ago, something that made my chest tighten with old anxiety. During dinner, things got stranger. I'd made carnitas, rice, beans, and fresh tortillas, comfort food that usually had everyone talking and laughing. But the conversation kept hitting these weird pockets of silence where Diego would say something to his parents in rapid Spanish, and they'd nod seriously, and Sophia would look confused but try to smile anyway. I speak Spanish, of course. I grew up in a household where English and Spanish flowed together like water, where my grandmother would curse in Spanish and pray in Latin and tell stories in whatever language felt most true in the moment. But I'd gotten out of practice over the years, especially after my husband died. Most of my life in Phoenix was conducted in English, and I'd let my Spanish get rusty. Still, I caught pieces of what Diego was saying to his parents. Fragments about money, about Sophia's job, about the house. Nothing I could string together into full meaning, but enough to make that cold feeling in my stomach grow larger. Then came the moment that should have been my wake-up call. We were talking about wedding plans. When, where, how big. Sophia was explaining that they wanted something small and intimate, maybe in the mountains outside Denver. Diego was nodding along, but then he said something to his parents that made his mother's eyes widen. I didn't catch all of it, but I heard enough. Something about rapido and immigration and a phrase that sounded like dispuse podmos. After we can. After we can what? I excused myself to get dessert from the kitchen, but really I needed a moment to think. My hands were shaking as I cut the flan I'd made, and I found myself straining to hear their conversation from the dining room. They were speaking Spanish now, all of them except Sophia, who was asking what they were talking about. Just wedding traditions, mi amor, Diego said, switching back to English. My parents want to make sure we do everything properly. But I'd heard enough to know they weren't talking about wedding traditions. They were talking about timelines. About moving quickly. About something that needed to happen after something else. When I returned with dessert, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting what I'd heard, instead of asking the questions that were burning in my throat, I smiled politely and pretended I understood nothing. I wish I could say I was being strategic, that I knew even then that knowledge was power and silence was a weapon. But the truth is simpler and more painful. I was scared. Scared of being wrong, scared of ruining Sophia's happiness, scared of being the paranoid mother who couldn't let her daughter be happy. So I played the gracious hostess. I served dessert, poured more wine, and listened to Diego charm everyone with stories about his childhood in Bogotá. I watched his parents beam with pride when he spoke, and I saw how Sophia looked at him like he hung the moon. But I also started paying attention in a different way. I started listening not just to what was being said, but to what wasn't being said. I started watching not just what people did, but what they avoided doing. Diego never asked Sophia what she thought about anything. He told her. He'd say things like, "We think we'll have the wedding in the spring," or "We want to buy a house in Sophia's neighborhood," or "We believe children should come quickly after marriage." Always we, never you. Always his decisions presented as joint decisions. Sophia never contradicted him. Even when he said things I knew she disagreed with, like having children right away, which she'd always said she wasn't sure about, she just nodded and smiled. Once, she started to say something about wanting to travel before settling down, but Diego smoothly interrupted with a story about their honeymoon plans, and she let herself be redirected. His parents were lovely, but they clearly didn't speak much English, which meant all their communication with Sophia went through Diego, which meant Diego controlled every interaction, every impression, every piece of information that passed between them and my daughter. By the time they left that night, I had a splitting headache and a heart full of dread. Sophia hugged me goodbye, and for just a moment, she held on a little too long. "Thank you for tonight, Mom," she whispered. "It means everything to me that you like him." I wanted to tell her right then that liking him wasn't the problem. The problem was that I was starting to see through him. But she looked so happy, so hopeful, that I just hugged her back and told her I loved her. Diego shook my hand again, that same firm but not too firm grip. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Rivera. I hope we can be very close family soon." There was something in his eyes when he said it. Something that felt like a promise and a threat all at once. After they left, I sat in my kitchen and tried to make sense of what I'd observed. I made a list in my head of all the things that bothered me. The pointed questions about money, the way he controlled conversations, how different Sophia seemed around him, the Spanish conversations I couldn't quite follow. But then I made another list. How happy Sophia looked, how respectful he'd been to me, how much his parents clearly loved him, how stable and successful he seemed. Maybe I was reading too much into everything. Maybe this was just what it looked like when your daughter grew up and chose a partner you didn't quite understand. I decided to wait. To watch. To hope I was wrong. 3 months later, they were married in a courthouse ceremony in Denver with just 2 witnesses. Sophia called me afterward, breathless with joy, to tell me they'd decided not to wait for a big wedding. "We just couldn't wait any longer to start our life together," she said. "You understand, don't you, Mom?" I understood more than she knew. But by then, it was too late to do anything but smile into the phone and tell her how happy I was for her. That was the last time Sophia sounded truly happy. Everything that happened after that night in my dining room was just Diego showing me exactly who he was. And me learning exactly what kind of woman I could become when someone threatened my child. But we're not there yet. First, you need to understand just how deep this rabbit hole went. Because what I discovered about Diego in the months after their wedding made that dinner conversation look like child's play. You know what's terrifying about watching someone you love disappear? It doesn't happen all at once, like in the movies. It's not a dramatic kidnapping or a sudden absence. It's the slow erosion of everything that made them who they were, grain by grain, until one day you realize you're talking to a stranger who just happens to have your daughter's face. That's what the next 8 months felt like. Watching Sophia vanish in slow motion while I stood helpless on the sidelines, screaming into a void. If you've ever watched someone you love change into someone you don't recognize, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you do, leave me a comment below, because this story gets darker before it gets lighter, and I want to know I'm not alone in this. The changes started small. Phone calls that used to last an hour became 20-minute check-ins. Then 15 minutes. Then just texts with single-word answers to my questions. Fine. Good. Busy. Like my daughter had been replaced with a telegram. When I asked about her job, she'd change the subject. When I asked about her friends, she'd make vague comments about being too busy for social stuff right now. When I asked about Diego, her voice would get that bright, brittle quality that meant she was performing happiness instead of feeling it. But it was the Thanksgiving incident that really opened my eyes to what was happening. Sophia had always spent Thanksgiving with me. It was our tradition. She'd fly in Wednesday night, we'd cook together Thursday morning, and spend the weekend catching up and going through old photo albums. She'd been doing it for 12 years, ever since college. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, she called to tell me she wouldn't be coming. Diego's family wants to start their own traditions, she explained, and I could hear the apology in her voice. You understand, right, Mom? Now that I'm married, I need to prioritize his family too. I understood. Theoretically, marriage meant compromise, meant building new traditions. But something about the way she said it, like she was reciting lines she'd memorized, made my blood pressure spike. Of course, Mija, I said. But maybe you could come for just Thursday. Or Friday. I could even come to Denver if you want. No. The response was too quick, too sharp. Then, softer. I mean, no, that won't work. We have a lot planned. But maybe Christmas. Maybe Christmas. From a daughter who had never missed a major holiday in her life. I spent Thanksgiving alone for the first time in 34 years, staring at a table set for one and trying to convince myself this was normal. That this was what happened when your children got married and started their own lives. But Elena, thank God for Elena, wasn't having it. She showed up at my house around 3 in the afternoon, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the expression that meant she was about to say something I needed to hear but didn't want to. This is bullshit, Carmen, she announced, setting the wine on my counter. Sophia has never missed Thanksgiving. Never. And now suddenly she can't even come for one day. She's married now, Elena. Things change. Things change, yes. But people don't disappear. When Carlos got married, she was talking about her youngest son. Did he stop calling me? Did he stop coming to family dinners? Did he start acting like I was some kind of inconvenience? I didn't answer because we both knew the answer. Carlos had gotten even more attentive after marriage, bringing his wife over for Sunday dinners and calling Elena twice a week just to chat. Something is wrong, Elena continued. And you know it. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What was I going to do about it? I was 68 years old, living alone in Phoenix, and my daughter was a grown woman living her own life 800 miles away. What could I do? But Elena's visit lit a fire under me that I'd been trying to ignore. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Sophia was in high school. I stalked her social media. What I found there made my heart sink to my shoes. Sophia's Instagram, which used to be full of pictures of her hiking adventures, her work friends, her cooking experiments, had become a shrine to Diego. Every photo was of them together, at restaurants, at events, on what looked like expensive trips. But in every single picture, Sophia looked diminished, smaller, like she was trying to take up less space. The captions were even more telling. Where she used to write funny, sarcastic observations about her life, now everything was about my amazing husband and so blessed and living my best life. It read like a hostage note written by someone who'd never met the real Sophia. But it was the comments that really got to me. Her college friends were writing things like "miss you," and "when can we see you," and "call me back." The kind of comments that suggested Sophia wasn't just avoiding family, she was avoiding everyone. I scrolled back through months of posts, watching my daughter's personality evaporate in real time. The last photo where she looked genuinely happy, where her smile reached her eyes and her laugh seemed real, was from their honeymoon in June. By December, she looked like a different person entirely. Christmas came and went without a visit. Sophia sent me a beautiful cashmere scarf and called for exactly 12 minutes on Christmas morning before Diego's voice could be heard in the background saying something about needing to leave for his parents' house. "I have to go, Mom," Sophia said, and for just a moment, her voice cracked. "But I love you. You know that, right?" "I love you too, Mija. More than you know." "I know," she whispered, and then the line went dead. That was the moment I knew for certain that my daughter was in trouble. Not the kind of trouble you could fix with money or advice or even tough love. The kind of trouble that required rescue. I started making plans. First, I called Diego's old university. I told them I was a potential employer checking references for a job application. What I learned made my blood run cold. Diego had never finished his MBA program. He'd dropped out after one semester, owing the school nearly $15,000 in unpaid tuition. The registrar, breaking protocol because she felt sorry for what she thought was a confused elderly woman, told me he'd been asked to leave the program due to academic integrity issues. Academic integrity issues. He'd been caught cheating. Next, I hired a private investigator. Yes, you heard that right. Carmen Rivera, retired hospital administrator and grandmother-to-be, hired an actual private investigator to look into her daughter's husband. It felt like something out of a movie, but desperation makes you do things you never thought possible. What Maria Santos, PI, discovered over the next 6 weeks made me understand that my worst fears had been optimistic. Diego wasn't just a liar. He was a professional liar. He'd been married twice before, both times to American women, both marriages ending in divorce within 2 years. Both ex-wives had restraining orders against him. Both had lost significant amounts of money during the relationships. His current immigration status was precarious. He was on a student visa that was no longer valid since he'd dropped out of school. He was working illegally, using someone else's social security number. And according to Maria's sources, he was already talking to lawyers about expediting his path to permanent residency through marriage to Sofia. But the worst part, the part that made me physically sick when Maria delivered her report, was what she'd discovered about his plans for after he got his green card. He'd been seen with other women. Multiple other women. One of his friends, recorded without knowing it during a conversation at a bar in Denver, had laughed about Diego's long-term strategy. How he planned to stay married to Sofia just long enough to secure his status, then find a reason to divorce her and claim half of everything she owned, including her future inheritance from me. Maria handed me a folder full of photographs, documents, and recorded conversations that painted a picture of a man who had turned manipulation into an art form. But the most damaging evidence was a series of text messages between Diego and his friend Carlos, not my nephew, a different Carlos, discussing the timeline. According to these messages, Diego planned to file for divorce sometime in the next year, claiming irreconcilable differences. He'd already consulted with a lawyer about Colorado's property division laws. He knew exactly how much money Sofia made, exactly what benefits she received from her job, and had a detailed understanding of what he could expect to receive in a divorce settlement. But first, he needed to make sure I was out of the picture. The texts talked about isolating her from family and making sure the old lady doesn't interfere. There were discussions about moving Sofia across the country, about finding ways to make her cut contact with me entirely, about ensuring that when the divorce happened, she'd have no support system to fall back on. Reading those messages felt like having my chest cracked open with a crowbar. This man hadn't just married my daughter for a green card, he targeted her specifically because of me. Because of what he thought she'd inherit. Because of what he thought he could take from both of us. I sat in my kitchen that night, staring at Maria's report, and felt something I hadn't experienced since the day my husband died. Pure, crystalline rage. But rage, I was about to learn, could be a gift if you knew how to use it properly. And I was about to get very creative with mine. Because Diego had made one crucial mistake in all his planning and scheming and manipulating. He'd assumed that a 68-year-old Mexican-American woman from Phoenix would be too polite, too traditional, too afraid to fight back. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I disagree. I think revenge is best served with surgical precision and a side of poetic justice. Because what I was planning for Diego wasn't just payback, it was an education. And class was about to be in session. But before I tell you about the most satisfying dinner party of my life, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a story about getting even. It's about what happens when someone pushes the wrong woman too far. So if you're enjoying this journey with me, make sure you're subscribed, because things are about to get very interesting. After Maria delivered her report, I spent 3 days in what I can only describe as a rage blackout. I didn't eat. I barely slept. I paced around my house like a caged animal, alternating between fury and heartbreak, between wanting to drive straight to Denver and drag Sofia home, and wanting to destroy Diego so completely that he'd never recover. But on the 4th day, I did something that surprised even me. I got strategic. I'd spent 30 years as a hospital administrator, managing crisis situations, difficult personalities, and impossible budgets. I'd negotiated with insurance companies, dealt with grieving families, and fired doctors who thought their egos were more important than patient care. I knew how to plan, how to execute, and how to win. Diego thought he was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. He was about to discover that he was actually playing checkers while I was about to launch a full-scale military campaign. Step 1. Reconnaissance. I needed to know everything: Diego's routines, Sofia's schedule, their social circle, their finances, their weaknesses. I couldn't just act on emotion. I needed intelligence. I reconnected with Sofia's college roommate, Jessica, who lived in Denver. I told her I was worried about Sophia and asked if she'd seen her lately. What Jessica told me confirmed my worst fears. Sophia had become virtually invisible. She'd stopped responding to texts, stopped attending their monthly girls' nights, and had even missed Jessica's birthday party, something she'd never done before. "It's like she's been replaced by a robot," Jessica said during our phone conversation. "She still looks like Sophia, but she doesn't talk like Sophia, doesn't laugh like Sophia. And Diego. God, Carmen. Diego gives me the creeps. He's always hovering, always watching, always speaking for her." Jessica agreed to help me keep tabs on them, but subtly. She'd drive by their apartment occasionally, try to run into Sophia at places she used to frequent, and report back to me. It wasn't quite surveillance, but it was close enough. Step 2. Documentation. I contacted an immigration attorney in Phoenix, not to turn Diego in, not yet, but to understand exactly what his legal situation looked like and what my options were. What I learned was both encouraging and terrifying. Diego was definitely in the country illegally now, working without proper authorization, and using fraudulent documents. Any one of these things could result in immediate deportation. But as Sophia's husband, he also had certain protections and a clear path to legal status if their marriage was considered legitimate. The key word being legitimate. If immigration authorities could be convinced that the marriage was fraudulent, entered into solely for the purpose of obtaining legal status, then Diego would not only be deported, he'd be banned from re-entering the United States for 10 years. Maybe permanently, depending on the other charges that could be filed. But proving marriage fraud isn't easy. It requires evidence of deception, of a pattern of behavior that shows the marriage was never intended to be real. It requires documentation that the foreign spouse had no intention of building a genuine life with their American partner. Fortunately, I was about to have access to exactly that kind of evidence. Step 3. The invitation. In early February, I called Sophia. I'd been keeping our conversations light and brief, not wanting to alert Diego to my growing suspicions. But now I had a mission. "Mija," I said, "I've been thinking about what you said at Christmas, about wanting to bring Diego and his parents back for another visit. What if we did that for Easter? A big family dinner, just like before." I could hear the surprise in Sophia's voice. "Really? You'd want to do that again?" "Of course. I loved meeting his parents, and I feel like we didn't get enough time to really get to know each other. Plus, I want to practice my Spanish. I've been taking classes." This was partially true. I had been taking Spanish classes, online, intensive courses designed to shake the rust off my childhood fluency. But not for the reasons Sophia thought. "That would be amazing, Mom. Diego's parents loved you. They've been asking about you." I bet they have, I thought. Wonderful. And maybe this time his parents could stay a few extra days. I have plenty of room, and it would give us more time to really connect as families. Sophia was practically vibrating with excitement by the time we hung up. She promised to talk to Diego and his parents and get back to me with dates. Step 4. Preparation. I had 6 weeks to get ready for what I was already thinking of as the Last Supper. 6 weeks to become fluent enough in Spanish to understand every word that would be spoken in my house. 6 weeks to set up recording devices that could capture conversation without being obvious. 6 weeks to plan a menu that would encourage lingering, relaxed conversation. The kind of atmosphere where people drop their guards and say things they shouldn't. I threw myself into Spanish study like my life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. Sophia's life certainly did. I hired a tutor, a young woman named Patricia who was working on her graduate degree in linguistics. I told her I wanted to surprise my daughter's in-laws with my improved Spanish, which was true enough. Patricia was amazed at how quickly I picked things back up. "You must have been very fluent as a child," she said during one of our sessions. "The foundation is all there, it's just been sleeping." What she didn't realize was that rage is an excellent motivator for language learning. Every verb conjugation, every subjunctive construction, every idiomatic expression I mastered was another weapon in my arsenal. By the end of March, I was dreaming in Spanish and thinking in strategies that would have made Sun Tzu proud. I also spent those weeks gathering intelligence through Jessica. Diego and Sophia had moved to a more expensive apartment. Suspicious, given that Sophia's salary hadn't changed and Diego wasn't supposed to be working. Diego had been seen at expensive restaurants and bars, always with different groups of people, often without Sophia. And most importantly, Jessica had overheard a phone conversation where Diego had been speaking Spanish to someone about timing and the inheritance situation. The pieces were all falling into place. But the most crucial part of my preparation had nothing to do with language or surveillance. It had to do with something much simpler: accepting who I was about to become. I'd lived 68 years as a woman who followed rules, who gave people the benefit of the doubt, who believed in fairness and second chances. I'd raised my children to be honest, to treat people with respect, to assume the best in others. But sometimes the world shows you that kindness is a luxury you can't afford. Sometimes protecting the people you love means becoming someone you never thought you could be. I was about to become the kind of woman who could smile sweetly while planning someone's destruction. The kind of woman who could serve dinner and devastation on the same plate. The kind of woman who could look evil in the face and not just stand up to it, but defeat it completely. 3 days before Easter, Diego called me himself. This was unusual. He usually let Sophia handle communication with me. But his voice was smooth, charming, the same practice tone he'd used during that first dinner. "Mrs. Rivera, I wanted to thank you personally for inviting my parents back. They have not stopped talking about your wonderful hospitality." "Of course, Diego. Family is everything, isn't it?" Sigh. "Exactly. Family is everything. And I want you to know that I consider you family now. Sophia is lucky to have such a caring mother." I wondered if he practiced these lines in the mirror, the way he practiced that smile. "I feel the same way about you, Diego. I'm so glad Sophia found someone who understands the importance of family." There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had a different quality. Softer, more intimate, like he was sharing a secret. "Mrs. Rivera, there is something I wanted to discuss with you while we are there. Something about Sophia's future, about our future. I think you will be very interested in what I have to share." My blood turned to ice water. This was it. This was him making his move, whatever it was. "Of course, Diego. I'm always interested in Sophia's happiness." "Perfect. I think this Easter will be very special for all of us. A new beginning, you could say." A new beginning. He had no idea how right he was. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and felt that familiar cold rage settle over me like armor. Diego thought he was about to manipulate an old woman into whatever scheme he was planning. He thought I was just another obstacle to be managed, another person to be charmed into compliance. He was about to learn that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. The dinner was scheduled for Saturday evening, April 15th. Diego's parents were arriving Friday and would stay through Tuesday. Plenty of time for them to get comfortable, to feel safe, to let their guards down completely. Plenty of time for Diego to show me exactly who he really was. And plenty of time for me to show him exactly who he was dealing with. I spent Friday preparing. I cleaned the house until it sparkled. I arranged fresh flowers in every room. I prepared ingredients for a feast that would take hours to eat and encourage lingering conversation. I tested the small recording devices I'd purchased, legal in Arizona as long as I was a party to the conversation, and placed them strategically around the dining room and kitchen. But most importantly, I prepared myself mentally for what was coming. Because I knew, with the certainty that comes from months of planning and investigation, that tomorrow night Diego was going to reveal his true intentions. And when he did, I was going to be ready. I went to bed Friday night with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. Not peace. There would be no peace until this was over, but the cold, steady calm of a soldier the night before battle. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Arizona spring day that made you understand why people moved to the desert. I woke up early, said a prayer for Sophia's safety and my own courage, and began cooking the meal that would change everything. Because in less than 12 hours, Diego was going to discover what happened when someone threatened Carmen Rivera's family. And the entire world was about to see exactly what justice looked like when it was served with a side of perfectly seasoned carnitas. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of desert sunset that painted the sky in shades of orange and pink so vivid they looked artificial. I stood at my kitchen window, watching the light fade behind the mountains, and felt like I was about to step onto a stage where I'd been rehearsing my entire life for this one performance. If you've ever had to pretend everything was fine when your world was falling apart, you know exactly how I felt in that moment. And if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, make sure you share it with someone who needs to hear it, because what happened next changed everything. They arrived at 5:30, just as we'd planned. Sophia looked better than she had at Christmas, She'd gained back some of the weight she'd lost, and her smile seemed less brittle. For a moment, seeing her walk up my front steps, I wondered if I'd been wrong about everything. Maybe Diego really had changed. Maybe the private investigator had made mistakes. Maybe I was about to destroy my daughter's happiness based on paranoia and maternal overprotection. Then Diego stepped out of the car, and every doubt evaporated. He was wearing a new suit that probably cost more than Sophia's monthly rent. His watch was different too, a Rolex that caught the late afternoon light like a signal flare. His parents looked the same as before, warm and genuine, but Diego looked like a man who was celebrating something. "Mrs. Rivera," he called out, striding across my driveway with that practiced confidence that had once fooled me. "You look wonderful. Radiant, even." He hugged me, and I let myself be hugged, noting the expensive cologne, the perfect haircut, the way his embrace felt like a performance for an audience I couldn't see. "Diego," I said, stepping back to look at him. "My goodness, you look prosperous. That's a beautiful suit." His smile flickered for just a moment, so quickly I almost missed it. "Thank you. Business has been very good lately. Very, very good." Sophia beamed at him. "Diego got a huge promotion at work. Regional manager for the entire Southwest Division. Isn't that amazing?" Regional manager. Of a job he wasn't legally authorized to hold, working for a company that probably didn't exist. But I smiled and congratulated him, playing my part perfectly. His parents, Isabel and Roberto, were as lovely as I remembered. Isabel brought me another gift, a beautiful ceramic vase from Colombia, and Roberto complimented my garden again, which had exploded into full spring bloom. Their warmth felt genuine, which made what was about to happen even more tragic. We settled on the patio for cocktails, just as we had 9 months ago. But this time, I was listening differently. This time, every word in Spanish was being absorbed, analyzed, catalogued. The first hour was pleasant enough. We talked about their flight, the weather, Sophia's job. Diego was charming, solicitous, the perfect son-in-law. But I noticed things I'd missed before, how he never asked follow-up questions about anything Sophia said, how his attention wandered when she was speaking, how his parents seemed to defer to him in a way that felt less like respect and more like fear. It was when we moved inside for dinner that things began to shift. I'd prepared a feast, carnitas that had been slow cooking all day, fresh tortillas, 3 kinds of rice, beans simmered with epazote, chilies rellenos, and a dozen side dishes that filled my dining room table until it groaned under the weight. The kind of meal that was meant to last for hours, that encouraged people to relax, to drink wine, to let their guards down completely. "Dios mío," Roberto breathed, looking at the spread. "Carmen, this is incredible. You have outdone yourself." "It's nothing," I said, the traditional response. "Just a little something to welcome family." Diego poured wine, expensive wine, I noted, that he'd brought himself, and raised his glass. "To family," he said, looking directly at me. "And to new beginnings." "To new beginnings," I echoed, meeting his eyes. If only he knew. For the first half hour, conversation flowed as smoothly as the wine. Diego was performing beautifully, asking about my health, complimenting the food, telling amusing stories about his work. But as the evening progressed and the wine loosened tongues, I began to hear what I'd been waiting for. It started with small asides to his parents in Spanish. Comments about the house, about the neighborhood, about their investment potential of Phoenix real estate. His parents nodded politely, but I caught Isabel shooting him a few looks that seemed concerned. Sophia, oblivious to the Spanish conversation, was chattering about wedding plans they were making for a renewal ceremony. "We want to do it right this time," she said, reaching for Diego's hand. "Something big and beautiful that all our families can attend." Diego smiled at her, but said something to his parents about keeping up appearances and playing the long game. My grip tightened on my wine glass. "That sounds wonderful, Mija," I said. "But expensive. How are you managing all these costs? The new apartment, the fancy restaurants Jessica mentioned, now a big wedding." Diego's smile never wavered, but I saw his jaw clench. "We are very good at managing money, Mrs. Rivera. Very strategic about our investments and our future." He turned to his parents and said something in Spanish that made Roberto shift uncomfortably in his chair. Something about the timeline moving up and securing everything faster than planned. I excused myself to get more wine from the kitchen, but really I needed a moment to process what I was hearing. Diego wasn't just planning to defraud Sofia, he was accelerating his timeline. Something had changed, some opportunity had presented itself, and he was moving faster than originally planned. When I returned to the dining room, the conversation had shifted to family traditions. Isabel was asking Sofia about American wedding customs, and Diego was translating back and forth. But I was listening to his Spanish translations, and what I heard made my blood run cold. He wasn't translating Sofia's answers accurately. When Sofia talked about wanting a small, intimate ceremony, Diego told his parents she was planning una boda muy grande y costosa, a very large and expensive wedding. When Sofia mentioned wanting to wait a few years before having children, Diego translated that as her being eager to start a family immediately. He was feeding his parents a completely different version of Sofia's hopes and dreams, building a narrative that served his purposes while keeping everyone in the dark about what was really happening. But the worst was yet to come. As we moved into the third hour of dinner, as the wine and the warmth of the evening worked their magic, Diego began to relax. Really relax, in a way I'd never seen before. His smile became more genuine, his laughter more natural. Not because he was happy, but because he thought he was among friends. Because he thought he was safe. That's when he made his fatal mistake. Sofia excused herself to use the bathroom, and the moment she was out of earshot, Diego leaned back in his chair with the satisfied air of a man who had just won a prize. "Roberto," he said to his father in Spanish, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I told you this would work perfectly." Roberto looked uncomfortable. "Diego, are you sure about this? Sofia is a good girl." "Maybe." "A good girl?" Diego laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. "She's perfect for exactly what we need. Trusting, isolated from her family, and completely under control." Isabel put down her wine glass. "What do you mean, under control?" "I mean she does exactly what I tell her to do. She stopped talking to her friends, stopped making decisions without consulting me first, stopped questioning anything I say. It's taken months, but the training is finally complete." The training. He was talking about my daughter like she was a dog he'd been teaching tricks. But he wasn't done. As I sat frozen in my chair, trying to keep my face neutral while my heart pounded like a drum, Diego continued to explain his master plan to his parents. "The timeline has moved up," he said, pouring himself more wine. "My lawyer says if we can prove she's completely financially dependent on me, the divorce settlement will be even larger. So I've been encouraging her to quit her job, to let me handle all the finances, to trust me completely with everything." Divorce. Roberto's voice was sharp with surprise. "Diego, what are you talking about?" And that's when Diego delivered the words that would haunt my dreams for months afterward. The words that turned suspicion into certainty, fear into rage, planning into action. "Come on, Papa," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did you really think I was going to stay married to this ugly cow's daughter forever?" Time stopped. The world went silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. This ugly cow's daughter. He was talking about Sofia, my beautiful, brilliant, trusting daughter, like she was livestock he'd purchased for slaughter. But he wasn't finished destroying my world. Not yet. "The plan is working perfectly," he continued, oblivious to the fact that I was sitting 3 feet away, understanding every word. "I'll stay married long enough to get my green card secured, maybe another year. Then I'll file for divorce, claim she was emotionally abusive, take half of everything she owns plus ongoing support. And when the old cow dies," he gestured casually in my direction, "Sofia will inherit everything, which means I'll have access to everything." My vision went red around the edges. This man wasn't just planning to destroy my daughter's happiness. He was planning to destroy her entire life, piece by piece, while she thanked him for it. But I forced myself to stay calm, to keep listening, to gather every piece of evidence I could before I acted. Because Diego was about to give me the ammunition I needed to destroy him completely. And he was about to discover that this old cow had horns. What happened next will live in my memory forever. Not just because it was the moment I'd been planning for months, but because it was the moment I finally understood what people mean when they talk about justice being served. If you're still with me on this journey, take a second to hit that like button, because we're about to reach the heart of everything. And trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Diego was still talking, growing more animated as the wine and his sense of safety made him reckless. Isabel and Roberto looked increasingly uncomfortable, but he seemed oblivious to their discomfort. He was too caught up in his own brilliance, too proud of his elaborate scheme to notice that his parents were practically squirming in their seats. The best part, he continued, leaning forward like he was sharing state secrets, is that she has no idea. None of them do. Sophia thinks I'm the perfect husband, and this stupid old woman thinks I'm the son she never had. He actually gestured toward me when he said it, pointed at me like I was a piece of furniture while he explained how he was planning to rob me blind. But Diego, Isabel said, her voice strained, what about love? What about building a real life together? Diego threw back his head and laughed, actually laughed, at his mother's question. Mama, love doesn't pay for green cards. Love doesn't buy freedom. Love is for people who can afford it. That's when I heard Sophia's footsteps in the hallway, coming back from the bathroom. Diego heard them too, and his entire demeanor shifted like someone had flipped a switch. The cruel smile disappeared, replaced by his practiced mask of devotion. His voice dropped back to its normal volume, and when Sophia appeared in the doorway, he was the picture of the loving husband again. There's my beautiful wife, he said, standing to pull out her chair with exaggerated gallantry. We were just talking about how lucky I am to have found you. Sophia beamed at him, and my heart broke into approximately 1,000 pieces. Not just because she believed him, but because I could see how desperately she wanted to believe him. How much she needed this fairy tale to be real. What were you talking about? She asked, settling back into her chair. Just family stories, Diego said smoothly. My parents were telling me about their courtship. Very romantic. Isabel and Roberto nodded along, but I could see the strain around their eyes. They were good people caught up in their son's web of lies, and they clearly had no idea how to handle what they'd just heard. But I did. I excused myself to get dessert, taking my time in the kitchen to steady my nerves and make sure my voice would be calm when I returned. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for. Everything had to be perfect. When I came back with the flan I'd made, along with coffee and after-dinner drinks, Diego was in the middle of another story about his successful business dealings. Sophia was hanging on every word, pride radiating from her like heat from a fire. I served dessert, refilled wine glasses, and played the perfect hostess while my mind calculated angles and timing. Diego was relaxed now, confident in his performance, speaking more Spanish with his parents than English with Sophia, which meant more opportunities for him to reveal exactly who he was. And he didn't disappoint. As the evening wound down, as Sophia began to look tired from the wine and the long day, Diego turned to his parents one last time. I think he meant it to be a final confirmation of his plans, a last chance to reassure them that everything was under control. Instead, it became his confession. Don't worry about any of this, he told them in Spanish, his voice low but not quite low enough. I have everything planned perfectly. The green card application is already in progress. My lawyer says we can expedite the divorce proceedings once my status is secure. And the best part is, by the time it's over, this ugly cow's daughter will be so broken down she won't even fight for custody of her own money. He actually used the word quebrada, broken. Like Sophia was something he was planning to shatter deliberately. I'm going to destroy her self-esteem so completely that she'll believe the divorce is her fault. She'll hand over everything willingly, just to make the pain stop. It's beautiful, really. Psychological warfare at its finest. That was it. That was the moment when Diego sealed his own fate. I stood up slowly, my legs surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Everyone looked at me, Sophia with mild concern, Isabel and Roberto with growing alarm, Diego with the casual attention you'd give to someone clearing dishes. Diego, I said quietly, that was very interesting. Something in my tone must have penetrated his wine-soaked confidence because his eyes sharpened slightly. What do you mean, Mrs. Rivera? I walked around the table until I was standing directly behind his chair, close enough to see the pulse in his neck, close enough to smell his expensive cologne and his fear, which was just beginning to bloom. I mean, I said, switching to Spanish so perfect and fluent that his face went white, it was very interesting to hear your thoughts on psychological warfare, and your plans for my daughter, and your opinion of this ugly old cow. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the living room. Sophia's mouth fell open. Isabel gasped. Roberto closed his eyes like he was praying. And Diego. Diego looked like a man who had just realized he'd been playing poker with someone who could see all his cards. Mrs. Rivera, he stammered, also in Spanish now, I think you misunderstood. I don't think I misunderstood anything, I interrupted, my voice getting stronger with every word. I think I understood perfectly. You think my daughter is perfect for your green card scheme because she's trusting and isolated. You've been training her like a dog to be financially dependent on you. You plan to divorce her after you get your papers, take half her money, and wait for me to die so you can get the rest through her inheritance. Sophia was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Mom, what are you saying? What's going on? I turned to my daughter, switching back to English, my heart breaking all over again at the confusion and fear in her eyes. Mija, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Diego has been speaking Spanish all evening, assuming I couldn't understand him. He's been telling his parents about his plans for your marriage. Plans? Sophia's voice was small, uncertain. What kind of plans? Diego shot to his feet, that charming mask slipping completely. Carmen, you're being ridiculous. You obviously misunderstood. Sit down, I said, and something in my voice made him obey instantly. I understood every word. Including the part where you called my daughter the ugly cow's daughter and talked about how perfectly you were going to destroy her self-esteem. Sophia made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. He said what? But I wasn't done. 3 years of rage, months of planning, and a lifetime of protecting my child had built up to this moment, and I wasn't going to waste it. Would you like to hear the recording? I asked conversationally, because I have every word from tonight. Every plan, every insult, every detail of your fraud. Including your admission that you're working illegally, using fraudulent documents, and planning to commit marriage fraud. Diego's face had gone from white to green. You recorded us? That's illegal. Actually, in Arizona, it's perfectly legal as long as one party to the conversation consents. Which I do. I smiled at him, and it was not a nice smile. I also have documentation of your previous marriages, your immigration status, your financial history, and your real employment situation. Or should I say, your lack of employment situation. The fight went out of him all at once, like air leaving a punctured balloon. He slumped back in his chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume he'd borrowed for a play. But I still wasn't finished. I walked to the kitchen and came back with my phone, which had been recording everything for the past 3 hours. I set it on the table where everyone could see it. Sophia, I said gently, I want you to hear this. Not because I want to hurt you, but because you need to understand what you've been living with. I played back the last 10 minutes of recording. Diego's voice, clear and unmistakable, explaining his plans in vivid detail. His casual cruelty toward Sophia, his dismissive contempt for me, his calculating approach to marriage as a business transaction. Sophia listened with growing horror, tears streaming down her face. When it was over, she looked at Diego like she was seeing him for the first time. Is it true? She whispered. All of it. Diego opened his mouth, probably to lie again, to manipulate again, to charm his way out of this disaster. But I wasn't giving him the chance. It's all true, I said. And it's all documented. And as of tomorrow morning, it's all going to be in the hands of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's when Diego finally understood that his game was over. That his perfect plan had been turned inside out by the woman he'd dismissed as a harmless old cow. His face twisted with rage, and for a moment, I saw who he really was beneath all the masks and performances. You stupid bitch, he snarled. You have no idea what you've just done. You've destroyed your daughter's marriage, her happiness, everything. No, I said calmly. You did that. I just made sure everyone could see it. And then I delivered the line I'd been planning for months, the words that had sustained me through every sleepless night and every moment of doubt. I loved meeting you all tonight, I said in perfect Spanish, looking directly at Diego's parents. I bet Immigration will love meeting you too. What followed was chaos in the purest sense of the word. Have you ever watched someone's entire world implode in real time? It's both more terrible and more satisfying than you might imagine, especially when that someone has spent months systematically destroying your daughter's life. And if you're wondering whether I felt guilty about what I'd just unleashed, keep watching. Because the answer might surprise you. Diego's reaction was immediate and explosive. He shot up from his chair so fast it fell backward, his face contorted with rage and panic. For a moment, I thought he might actually become violent, and I was already calculating how quickly I could get to the kitchen knives if necessary. But his parents moved faster. Roberto stood up and grabbed his son's arm, speaking to him in rapid, angry Spanish. Not the polite, formal Spanish of dinner conversation, but the harsh, urgent Spanish of a father who has reached the absolute limit of his patience. Enough, Roberto said, his voice carrying an authority I hadn't heard from him before. Sit down and shut your mouth before you make this worse than it already is. Diego turned on his father with vicious fury. Worse? Worse? This crazy old bitch just destroyed everything. Years of planning, years of work. Isabel slapped him. Not hard, but sharp enough to cut through his hysteria and leave a red mark on his cheek. The sound echoed through my dining room like a gunshot. Don't you dare speak about her that way, Isabel said, her voice shaking with emotion. Don't you dare. This woman opened her home to us, cooked for us, welcomed us like family, and this is how you repay her kindness. Sophia was still sitting frozen in her chair, staring at the phone on the table like it was a venomous snake. Tears were streaming down her face, but she wasn't making any sound. It was the silence of someone whose entire reality had just shattered. Sophia, I said gently, moving to kneel beside her chair. Mija, look at me. She turned her head slowly, and the devastation in her eyes nearly broke me all over again. How long have you known? She whispered. I suspected something was wrong at Thanksgiving. I knew for certain after I hired the private investigator in January. You hired a private investigator? Her voice was hollow, distant. To investigate my husband. To investigate the man who was isolating you from your family, controlling your finances, and planning to destroy your life for money. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Why didn't you tell me? It was the question I'd been dreading, the one I'd asked myself 100 times during the planning stages. Why hadn't I just confronted her with the evidence months ago? Why hadn't I tried to talk her out of the marriage from the beginning? Because you wouldn't have believed me, I said honestly. You were in love, or thought you were. If I'd shown up at your door with accusations and evidence, you would have chosen him over me. He would have convinced you I was jealous, manipulative, trying to control your life. You would have cut me out completely, and then I couldn't have protected you at all. Sophia stared at me for a long moment, processing this. I could see her mind working, probably thinking back over the past year, re-examining conversations and incidents through this new lens. The promotion story, she said suddenly. The regional manager position. That was all fake. He's been unemployed since he dropped out of his MBA program 18 months ago. He's been living off your salary and credit cards while planning to take everything you have. Diego, who had been whispering urgently with his parents, suddenly turned back to us. You want to know what's fake? He snarled. This whole performance is fake. Your mother is a vindictive old woman who can't stand to see you happy. She's been plotting against me from the moment we met. Plotting against you. Sophia's voice was getting stronger, anger beginning to cut through the shock. She invited you into her home. She cooked for your parents. She welcomed you into our family. She never welcomed me. She's been suspicious from day one, looking for any excuse to get rid of me. And now she's manufactured this whole elaborate scheme to destroy our marriage. Manufactured. I stood up, feeling my own anger flare. I didn't manufacture anything, Diego. I recorded your own words. Your own plans. Your own admissions. Plans that were just talk. Just venting frustration. You can't destroy someone's life over private conversations taken out of context. That's when Sophia finally snapped. She stood up slowly, and when she spoke, her voice carried a cold fury I'd never heard from her before. Out of context. You called me the ugly cow's daughter. You said you were training me like a dog. You planned to destroy my self-esteem so completely that I'd hand over my money willingly. What context makes that acceptable? Diego's facade cracked completely. You want context? Here's context. You are weak. You are boring. You are exactly the kind of woman men like me target because you're so desperate for love that you'll believe anything. I never loved you. I never even liked you. You were a means to an end, nothing more. The words hung in the air like poison. Sophia absorbed them with the kind of stillness that comes just before an explosion. Get out, she said quietly. Sophia, let's talk about this rationally. Get out. She screamed it this time, her voice breaking on the words. Get out of my mother's house. Get out of my life. Get out. Diego looked around the room, perhaps finally realizing that his charm and manipulation had no power here anymore. His parents were staring at him with shame and disgust. I was watching him with cold satisfaction. And Sophia, the woman he'd thought he had completely under control, was looking at him like he was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Fine, he said, straightening his expensive suit jacket. Fine. But this isn't over. You think you've won something here, but you have no idea what kind of legal trouble you've just bought yourself. Recording private conversations, harassment, conspiracy. Actually, I interrupted, the only person here who's committed crimes is you. Immigration fraud, identity theft, working without authorization, bigamy. Did I mention that your divorce from your second wife was never finalized? That makes your marriage to Sophia invalid, which means she's not responsible for any debts you've incurred. The color drained from his face again. That's not, how did you? Maria Santos is a very thorough investigator. She found things even you probably forgot about. Diego looked at his parents, perhaps hoping for support, but Roberto was shaking his head sadly and Isabel was crying silent tears. Come, Roberto said to his son. We need to leave now, before you say something else that makes this worse. But Diego wasn't finished destroying himself. You know what? I'm glad this happened. I'm glad you found out. Because now I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to act like I care about your pathetic little life, Sophia. I don't have to pretend your mother isn't a bitter old woman who couldn't stand to see her daughter happy. Happy? Sophia laughed, but it was a broken sound. You think you made me happy? You isolated me from my friends, controlled my money, made me question every decision I made. You didn't make me happy, you made me disappear. That's when Isabel stepped forward. This gentle woman in her 70s, who had been quietly horrified by everything she'd heard, looked her son in the eye and spoke with quiet dignity. Diego, she said in Spanish, you are not the son I raised. You are not the man I thought you were. And you are not welcome in my home anymore. The words hit Diego like physical blows. Whatever else he was, liar, fraud, manipulator, he was still a man who needed his mother's approval. Losing it seemed to break something fundamental in him. He looked around the room one last time, seeing only disgust and disappointment reflected back at him. Then, without another word, he walked out of my house and into the Arizona night. We listened to his rental car start up and drive away, the sound fading into silence. Then it was just the four of us, me, Sophia, and Diego's parents, sitting in the wreckage of what had seemed like a perfect evening just hours before. Roberto was the first to speak. Carmen, he said in careful English, we are so sorry. So very sorry. We had no idea. I know, I said. This isn't your fault. It is our fault, Isabel said, tears streaming down her face. We raised him. We should have seen what he was becoming. Sophia looked up at them, her eyes red from crying. Did you know? About the other marriages, the lies? No, Roberto said firmly. We knew nothing. If we had known, you would have stopped him. We would have dragged him back to Colombia ourselves, Isabel said with surprising fierceness. And that's when something beautiful happened in the midst of all this ugliness. Sophia reached across the table and took Isabel's hand. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way, she said. You seem like wonderful people, and I'm sorry your son put you in this position. Isabel squeezed Sophia's hand and said something in Spanish that I caught perfectly. You are a good girl. You deserve better than our son ever gave you. It was almost midnight by the time Roberto and Isabel finally left for their hotel. They insisted on taking a taxi rather than accepting a ride from me, saying they needed time to process everything that had happened. Before they left, Isabel hugged both Sophia and me, whispering apologies that neither of us needed to hear. Will we see you again? Sophia asked them, and I could hear the hope in her voice. Despite everything, she'd genuinely connected with Diego's parents. If you want to, Roberto said carefully, but we understand if you prefer to put all of this behind you. I'd like that, Sophia said. To see you again, I mean. You're not responsible for what he did. After they left, Sophia and I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee neither of us wanted and trying to process what had just happened. She looked exhausted, wrung out, like someone who'd been through a natural disaster. Mom, she said finally, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Of course. Was I really that blind? That stupid? How did I not see any of this? I set down my coffee cup and looked at my daughter, really looked at her. At 34, she was brilliant, accomplished, successful in her own right. But she was also a woman who'd been systematically manipulated by someone who'd made a career out of reading vulnerabilities and exploiting them. Mija, you weren't stupid. You were targeted by someone who does this professionally. Diego didn't choose you randomly. He studied you, learned your weaknesses, figured out exactly what you needed to hear. That's not a failure on your part. That's predatory behavior on his. But I should have seen the signs. The isolation from my friends, the way he controlled everything, how different I felt around him. You did see the signs, I said gently. Some part of you knew something was wrong. Remember Thanksgiving? How quickly you said no when I offered to come to Denver. Part of you was already protecting him from scrutiny, which means part of you already suspected there was something to scrutinize. Sophia was quiet for a long time, processing this. What happens now? She asked finally. Now you go home, file for divorce, and start rebuilding your life. And I make sure Diego faces consequences for what he's done. She looked up sharply. What kind of consequences? I showed her my phone, which had been recording all evening. Tomorrow morning, I'm taking this to ICE. Diego admitted on tape to immigration fraud, working without authorization, and using fraudulent documents. He also admitted to marriage fraud, entering into marriage solely for the purpose of obtaining legal status. Will he be deported? Almost certainly. And banned from re-entering the country, probably permanently. Sophia absorbed this information with an expression I couldn't quite read. Good, she said finally, and there was steel in her voice that reminded me of myself at her age. We talked until nearly 3 in the morning. About the warning signs she'd ignored, about how Diego had gradually isolated her from her support system, about the financial damage he'd done and how to repair it. But mostly, we talked about how she was going to rebuild her life from the ground up. I quit my job, she admitted at one point. 3 weeks ago. Diego convinced me that his promotion meant we didn't need my income anymore, and that I should focus on planning our future. This was news to me, and it made my blood boil all over again. So you have no income right now? None. And he's been handling all our finances, so I'm not even sure what bills have been paid or what debt we're in. It was worse than I'd thought. Diego hadn't just been planning to leave Sophia emotionally devastated, he'd been setting her up for complete financial ruin as well. First thing Monday morning, I said, you're calling your old job to see if you can get your position back. Then you're calling the bank to freeze any joint accounts. Then you're calling a divorce lawyer. I don't have money for a lawyer. I do. Sophia started to protest, but I cut her off. This is not the time for pride, Mija. This is the time for survival. Let me help you. She nodded, tears starting again. I'm so sorry, Mom. For cutting you out, for not listening, for bringing him into our lives. Stop, I said firmly. You have nothing to apologize for. You were victimized by someone who made a career out of victimizing people. The only person who should be sorry is Diego, and somehow I doubt he's capable of genuine remorse. We hugged then, for the first time in months, and I felt like I had my daughter back. Not completely. It would take time for her to recover from what Diego had done to her self-confidence and sense of reality. But she was home, she was safe, and she was finally seeing clearly. The next morning, Sophia slept until noon while I made phone calls. First to Maria Santos, my private investigator, to get copies of all her documentation on Diego. Then to the immigration attorney I'd consulted, to get the process started for reporting Diego's crimes. Finally, to ICE directly, to schedule an appointment to turn over evidence. When Sophia woke up, I had already laid out a comprehensive plan for dismantling her life with Diego and starting over. Bank calls, lawyer consultations, job applications, every step mapped out and prioritized. You've been busy, she said, looking at the legal pads covered with my notes. I've had months to prepare for this, I reminded her. I know exactly what needs to happen next. That afternoon, we drove to her old apartment together. Diego's car wasn't there, but we weren't taking any chances. I'd called Roberto that morning, and he'd confirmed that Diego had spent the night at their hotel, ranting about lawyers and revenge until they'd finally told him to be quiet or find somewhere else to stay. Sophia packed everything that mattered to her, clothes, photos, her grandmother's jewelry, important documents. Everything else, she left behind. 12 months of my life, she said, looking around the apartment that had been her home. 12 months completely wasted. Not wasted, I corrected her. Survived. There's a difference. As we loaded her belongings into my car, Sophia asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you think he ever cared about me at all? Even a little bit? I thought about Diego's casual cruelty the night before, his contempt for Sophia's trust, his complete lack of remorse for the pain he'd caused. But I also thought about my daughter, who was fragile enough right now without me adding to her hurt. I think he's incapable of caring about anyone but himself, I said carefully. Which means this was never about you not being worthy of love, Sophia. This was about him being incapable of giving it. 3 days later, ICE agents arrested Diego at the hotel where he was staying with his parents. According to Roberto, who called me afterward, Diego maintained his innocence until they played him portions of the recording from dinner. Then he apparently became very cooperative in hopes of reducing his sentence. It didn't work. Diego was deported 6 weeks later, after pleading guilty to multiple immigration violations. The judge banned him from re-entering the United States for 20 years, calling his conduct a systematic fraud perpetrated against both the immigration system and an innocent American citizen. Sophia's divorce was finalized 2 months after that. Since the marriage had been based on fraud, she wasn't responsible for any of the debt Diego had accumulated. She got her job back, found a new apartment, and slowly began rebuilding the friendships Diego had systematically destroyed. But the real victory came 8 months later, when Sophia called me with news that made my heart sing. "Mom," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, "I have something to tell you." My first thought was panic. Please God, not another man, not another whirlwind romance. But Sophia laughed at whatever expression must have crossed my face. "Relax, it's good news. I got promoted. Senior developer, with a 20% raise. And I've been accepted to grad school. Graduate school. MBA program, part-time while I work. I figure if I'm going to rebuild my life, I might as well rebuild it better than it was before." That night, I sat in my garden among the roses that had been blooming when this whole nightmare began, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year, complete peace. Diego was gone, permanently barred from ever hurting my daughter again. Sophia was not just surviving but thriving, stronger and wiser for having faced down her demons and won. And me? I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is become exactly as ruthless as their enemies. But this story isn't quite over. Because 6 months after Diego's deportation, I received a letter that reminded me that some kinds of justice take time to unfold completely. You'd think that watching your daughter's abuser get deported would be the end of the story, wouldn't you? That justice served would mean closure achieved, lessons learned, everyone living happily ever after. But life has a way of continuing to surprise you, even when you think you've seen it all. If this story has taught you anything about the power of standing up for the people you love, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because what happened next proved that the truth has a way of spreading far beyond what you ever intended. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 6 months after Diego's deportation. It was addressed to me, written in careful English on expensive stationery, postmarked from Bogotá. Dear Mrs. Rivera my name is Patricia Mendez. You do not know me, but I know about you. I was Diego's first wife. I had to sit down on my front porch to finish reading it. I learned about what happened from Roberto and Isabel, who reached out to me after Diego returned to Colombia. They thought I should know that someone had finally stopped him. I wanted to write to thank you. Not just for protecting your daughter, but for doing what I was never brave enough to do. Diego destroyed my life just as he was destroying Sophia's. I was young, naive, and completely unprepared for someone like him. By the time I understood what was happening, I was so broken down that I didn't think I was worth protecting. It took me 3 years to rebuild my confidence after our divorce. 3 years to trust my own judgment again. 3 years to believe that I deserved better than what he gave me. Your daughter is lucky to have a mother who fought for her. I hope someday to be as brave as you were. With gratitude. Patricia. I sat on that porch for a long time, holding Patricia's letter and thinking about the ripples that spread out from every act of courage. I'd thought I was just protecting Sophia, but apparently I'd also given permission to other women to believe they deserved protection too. It wasn't the only letter I received that fall. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived, this one from Denver. Inside was a card from Jessica, Sophia's college roommate. Carmen, Sophia told me what happened last Easter. I wanted you to know that your example gave me the courage to leave my own toxic relationship. I'd been making excuses for Tom's behavior for 2 years, telling myself that emotional abuse wasn't real abuse, that I was overreacting to his controlling behavior. Watching Sophia stand up for herself, and knowing that you stood up for her, helped me realize that I was worth standing up for too. Thank you for showing both of us what fierce love looks like. Love, Jessica. These letters kept coming throughout the fall and into winter. Not many, maybe 8 or 10 total, but each one from a woman who had heard the story secondhand and found in it the courage to make changes in her own life. Some left abusive husbands. Some confronted manipulative family members. One woman finally pressed charges against a boss who'd been sexually harassing her for years. I never solicited these letters or asked for these updates. But somehow, the story of that Easter dinner had spread through networks of women who recognized something familiar in Sophia's experience. Who saw in my response a template for how to fight back against people who prey on the ones we love. Sophia was amazed when I showed her the letters. I had no idea, she said. I told Jessica what happened, and I mentioned it to a few other friends, but I never imagined. Stories have power, I told her. Especially stories about women who refuse to be victims. But it wasn't just the letters that showed me how far the consequences of that night had spread. It was also what happened to Diego's parents. Roberto called me in November, 8 months after their son's deportation. He wanted to let me know that they'd decided to cut contact with Diego completely. He has not changed, Roberto told me in his careful English. He is angry, bitter, blaming everyone but himself. He asks us for money to hire lawyers, to pay for appeals, to start new schemes. We said no. This couldn't have been an easy decision. In traditional Latino families, you don't abandon your children, no matter what they've done. But Roberto and Isabel had seen who their son really was, and they'd chosen to protect future victims over protecting him. We are thinking of moving, Roberto continued. Maybe to the United States, if we can get visas. We want to be closer to good people, not closer to our son. I helped them start the immigration process. Not because I owed them anything, but because they were genuinely good people who'd been trapped in an impossible situation. Sometimes the family members of abusers are victims too, and Roberto and Isabel had spent years enabling Diego's behavior without understanding what they were really enabling. By spring, they'd been approved for tourist visas, and by summer, they were living in a small apartment in Phoenix, just 20 minutes from my house. Roberto found work as a handyman, he was skilled at carpentry and electrical work, and Isabel started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, using her own painful experience with her son to help other families recognize warning signs. Sophia visited them regularly when she came to see me. They'd become the grandparents she'd never had, and she'd become the daughter they'd always hoped Diego would give them. It was an odd kind of family, built from the wreckage of deception, but it was real in a way that Diego's performances had never been. Meanwhile, Sophia was thriving in ways that surprised even me. The MBA program was challenging but rewarding, and her work had promoted her twice in 18 months. She'd started dating again, carefully, with clear boundaries and excellent instincts about red flags. She'd rebuilt her friendships and started some new ones. She'd even begun speaking at workshops for other women who'd survived manipulative relationships. The best revenge, she told me one afternoon as we worked in my garden together, is living well. Living authentically. Living without fear. She was right, of course. But I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge is also making sure that predators face consequences for their actions. Sometimes love means becoming exactly as ruthless as you need to be to protect the people who matter. Not that I was holding grudges or anything. I'd moved on, built a beautiful life, reconnected with my daughter, and gained an extended family I never could have imagined. I was, by any reasonable measure, completely at peace with how everything had worked out. So when Maria Santos, my private investigator, called me in March, almost 2 years after that fateful Easter dinner, I was surprised to find myself interested in what she had to say. "Carmen," Maria said, I have some news about Diego that I thought you'd want to hear. I settled into my kitchen chair, coffee cup in hand, prepared to hear about whatever scheme Diego was running in Colombia, whatever new victims he'd found, whatever legal troubles he'd managed to get himself into. What Maria told me was better than anything I could have imagined. He's been arrested, she said without preamble. In Bogotá, 3 days ago. Charged with fraud, identity theft, and immigration violations related to his activities here in the States. But he's already been deported. How can they arrest him for crimes he committed here? Turns out our government has been building a case against him for a while now. When he was deported, it wasn't just for the marriage fraud with Sofia. They'd connected him to a whole network of people running similar scams. Green card marriages, document fraud, money laundering, the works. I felt that familiar cold satisfaction settling over me like a comfortable sweater. How much trouble is he in? Colombian authorities are considering extradition. If they send him back here to face trial, he's looking at federal charges that could put him away for 10 to 15 years. 10 to 15 years. I tried to feel sorry for him, tried to summon some compassion for a man who was about to spend the best years of his life in prison. But all I could think about was Sofia, and Patricia, and all the other women whose lives he'd damaged or planned to damage. There's more, Maria continued. The investigation has uncovered at least 6 other marriages, all following the same pattern. They're building cases against his whole network. 6 other marriages. 6 other women who'd been targeted, manipulated, used, and discarded. Women whose stories might have ended very differently if one old Mexican lady in Phoenix hadn't decided to learn Spanish and buy some recording equipment. That night, I called Sofia to tell her the news. She listened quietly, asked a few questions about the legal implications, and then was silent for a long time. How do you feel about it? I finally asked. Relieved, she said without hesitation. And proud of us. We didn't just save ourselves, Mom. We probably saved a lot of other people too. She was right. By refusing to be victims, by fighting back, by demanding justice, we'd disrupted an entire criminal enterprise. We'd probably prevented dozens of future crimes, protected women who would never even know they'd been in danger. But the most important thing we'd done was simpler than that. We'd learned that love sometimes requires courage, and courage sometimes requires becoming someone you never thought you could be. 2 weeks later, Colombian authorities approved the extradition. Diego was put on a plane back to the United States, where he would stand trial for crimes that went far beyond what he'd done to my daughter. I didn't attend the trial. I'd said my piece that Easter evening, and I had no desire to see Diego again. But Sofia went, not to confront him, but to testify on behalf of the other victims who needed their stories told. When it was over, Diego received a sentence of 12 years in federal prison, followed by permanent deportation. He would spend the next decade in an American jail cell, thinking about the night he underestimated the wrong woman. And me? I went back to my garden, my roses, my quiet life in Phoenix. But now it was a life expanded by an extended family that included Roberto and Isabel, enriched by friendships with women who'd found their own courage, and deepened by the knowledge that sometimes the most profound act of love is refusing to let someone destroy the person you die to protect. The story could end there, and it would be satisfying enough. But there's one more chapter, one final twist that reminded me that the universe has a sense of humor as twisted as my own. 3 years after that Easter dinner, I thought I'd heard the last of Diego Restrepo. He was serving his federal sentence, his criminal network had been dismantled, and the women he'd victimized had moved on with their lives. Justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and everyone had gotten their appropriate ending. Then Sofia called me on a Sunday morning in April, laughing so hard she could barely speak. "Mom," she gasped between giggles, "you are not going to believe what just happened. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, you know I've learned to appreciate irony in all its forms. So hit that subscribe button, because what Sofia was about to tell me was the kind of cosmic joke that makes you believe the universe has been paying attention all along." I got a call yesterday, Sofia continued, from a woman named Ana Gutierrez. She's a victims advocate with the FBI, and she wanted to interview me about Diego as part of their ongoing investigation. This wasn't surprising. Federal prosecutors often reached out to previous victims when building cases against repeat offenders. But here's the thing, Mom. She didn't just want to talk about Diego. She wanted to talk about you. Me. Apparently, what you did that night, the way you documented everything, the strategy you used to get his confession, the methodical way you built your case. It's become a model for how they train people to gather evidence in domestic fraud cases." I almost dropped the phone. "What do you mean, a model?" "I mean they literally teach a course at the FBI Academy called the Rivera Method. They use our case as an example of how victims' families can help build prosecutable cases against manipulative criminals." The Rivera Method. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair, trying to process this information. My amateur investigation, my desperate attempt to protect my daughter, had somehow become federal law enforcement training material. "There's more," Sophia said, still giggling. "Anna wants to interview you for a documentary they're making about marriage fraud prevention. They want to profile families who've successfully fought back against these kinds of schemes." A documentary. About me. About us. About that night when I decided I'd had enough of being polite to predators. "Sophia," I said slowly, "I'm 69 years old. I live alone with my roses and my crime shows. I'm not documentary material." "Mom, you took down a criminal enterprise with Spanish lessons and a smartphone. You're absolutely documentary material." 3 weeks later, a film crew showed up at my house. The producer, a sharp-eyed woman named Carmen Delgado, yes, another Carmen, we were everywhere, explained that they were making a film about marriage fraud for immigrants' families, helping them recognize and respond to predatory behavior. "Your case is unique," she told me as her crew set up lights in my living room, "because you didn't just react to the fraud, you prevented it from being completed. Most families don't discover what's happening until after the damage is done." They interviewed me for 3 hours, asking me to walk through every step of my investigation and planning. They filmed me in my kitchen, talking about the moment I decided to fight back. They recorded me in my garden, explaining how I'd used my roses as cover while I plotted Diego's downfall. But the most surreal moment came when they asked me to recreate the dinner scene. "Obviously, we can't film the actual conversation," Carmen Delgado explained, "but we'd like to show you sitting at your dining room table, maybe looking at your phone, to illustrate the moment when you revealed what you'd recorded." So there I was, 70-year-old Carmen Rivera, sitting at the same table where I'd destroyed a criminal's life, pretending to listen to recordings while a film crew captured my performance for posterity. "How did you feel in that moment?" the director asked me. "When you realized you had him?" I thought about it for a moment, remembering the cold satisfaction, the months of planning paying off, the look on Diego's face when he realized his game was over. "Like I'd just won the most important chess match of my life," I said honestly. "Like I'd finally become the woman my daughter needed me to be." The documentary aired 8 months later on a major network. I watched it at home with Sophia, Roberto, Isabel, and Elena. All of us crowded onto my couch with popcorn and wine, critiquing my television debut. "You look very serious," Isabel commented during one of my interview segments. "I was serious," I replied. "I was planning to destroy her son." We all laughed at that, even Isabel. Time and distance had given us the luxury of finding humor in what had once been pure terror and rage. But the real surprise came after the documentary aired. My phone started ringing with calls from women all over the country. Mothers, sisters, daughters, friends, who'd recognized similar patterns in their own lives and wanted advice on how to respond. I became, quite accidentally, a consultant for families dealing with suspected marriage fraud. Not officially. I wasn't licensed or trained for anything like that. But word of mouth is powerful, and apparently I'd developed a reputation for knowing how to gather evidence and build cases that would hold up in court. Elena thought it was hilarious. My little sister, the vigilante grandmother, she would say whenever people asked her about my new career. But I took it seriously. Every call represented another family in crisis, another vulnerable person being targeted by predators who thought they could operate with impunity. If my experience could help even one other family avoid what Sophia and I had been through, then everything we'd endured had been worthwhile. The most memorable consultation came from a woman in Oregon named Beth, whose daughter had married a man with a suspiciously similar pattern to Diego's behavior. Expensive gifts he couldn't afford, rushed timeline, isolation from family, controlling behavior wrapped in romantic gestures. "I don't have any proof," Beth told me during our phone conversation. "Just this feeling that something is wrong. What do you think I should do?" "Trust your instincts," I told her. "And document everything. Keep records of conversations, take screenshots of social media posts, write down dates and times when things feel off. You might never need any of it, but if you do need it, you'll be glad you have it." 6 months later, Beth called me back. Her daughter's husband had been arrested for immigration fraud. He'd been married to 3 different women simultaneously, using each relationship to establish different aspects of his legal status. If you hadn't told me to start documenting everything, Beth said, we never would have been able to prove the timeline of his deceptions. My daughter could have been financially ruined. Stories like Beth's reminded me that what had happened to Sophia wasn't an isolated incident. There were predators everywhere, targeting vulnerable people with sophisticated manipulation tactics. But there were also families willing to fight back, if they knew how. On the 5th anniversary of that Easter dinner, Sophia and I threw a party. Not to celebrate Diego's destruction, that felt too petty, but to celebrate survival, resilience, and the family we'd built from the wreckage of his schemes. Roberto and Isabel were there, of course, along with Elena and her whole crew. Jessica flew in from Denver, along with 2 of Sophia's other college friends. Maria Santos, my private investigator, came with her husband and kids. Even Carmen Delgado, the documentary producer, stopped by with a bottle of champagne and war stories from her latest project. We ate carnitas and drank too much wine and told stories about the night that changed everything. But mostly, we celebrated the life Sophia had built for herself. The successful career, the healthy relationships, the confidence that had grown back stronger than ever. I have an announcement, Sophia said as we were clearing dessert plates. Actually, 2 announcements. My heart did that maternal flutter it always did when Sophia had news. After everything we'd been through, I still worried every time she sounded excited about something. First, she said, grinning at all of us, I finished my MBA last month. Graduated summa cum laude. The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. Isabel immediately started crying proud grandmother tears, and Roberto opened another bottle of champagne. Second, Sophia continued, once the celebration died down, I've been offered a job with the FBI. The silence that followed was profound. The FBI. I managed. Financial Crimes Division. They want me to work on marriage fraud cases, using my technical skills and my personal experience with the subject. I stared at my daughter, processing this information. Sophia, working for the federal government, hunting down people like Diego as her actual job. It's perfect, she said, correctly reading my expression. I get to use everything I learned from this experience to help other people. I get to be the person I needed when I was going through it. That night, after everyone had gone home and Sophia was asleep in her old room, I sat in my garden and thought about the strange turns life takes. 5 years ago, I'd been a retired hospital administrator living quietly with her roses and her routines. Now I was apparently some kind of folk hero for amateur investigators. My daughter was about to become an FBI agent, and Diego's parents had become my chosen family. Diego himself was still in prison, with 7 more years left on his sentence. I thought about him sometimes, wondered if he'd learned anything from his experience, if he felt any remorse for the lives he'd damaged, if he understood how completely his greed had backfired. Probably not. People like Diego rarely develop the capacity for self-reflection. But it didn't matter anymore. He was exactly where he belonged, and the people he'd tried to victimize were thriving in ways he never could have imagined. The roses around me were blooming in the cool April evening, their fragrance heavy in the desert air. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sounds of the city. Cars passing, dogs barking, the gentle hum of life continuing in all its messy, complicated, beautiful forms. I thought about justice, and revenge, and the difference between the two. I thought about love, and protection, and the lengths we'll go to for the people who matter most. I thought about the woman I'd been before that Easter dinner, and the woman I'd become after it. But mostly, I thought about tomorrow, and the next call that would come from another desperate family, and how I would help them find their own version of courage. Because that's what this story was really about, not revenge, but transformation. Not just defeating evil, but becoming someone capable of defeating it. Not just protecting the people you love, but teaching them to protect themselves. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very determined, you get to change the world just a little bit in the process. 10 years later, I wake up every morning in the same house, tend to the same roses, and drink coffee from the same ceramic mug I've used for 20 years. But everything else has changed in ways I never could have imagined when I first planted those recording devices around my dining room table. If this story has shown you anything about the power of refusing to be anyone's victim, please leave me a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to share with you proves that sometimes the smallest act of defiance can ripple out into something that changes hundreds of lives. The biggest change is Sophia, who's now 39 and one of the most respected financial crimes investigators in the FBI. She's led dozens of operations that have taken down marriage fraud rings, immigration scams, and elder abuse networks. Last year, she received a commendation from the director himself for her work on a case that saved over 200 potential victims from a sophisticated international fraud operation. She's also married, happily this time, to a fellow FBI agent named Marcus who makes her laugh and challenges her professionally and treats her like the formidable woman she's become. Their wedding 3 years ago was everything her first wedding should have been. Surrounded by people who genuinely loved them, built on honesty and mutual respect, celebrated with joy instead of performed for an audience. I walked her down the aisle, and when the officiant asked who was giving this woman in marriage, I said, "She gives herself, but she has our blessing." Because that's what I'd learned from the Diego experience. You can't give people away, and you can't protect them from every bad decision. But you can teach them to trust their own judgment, and you can be there to catch them if they fall. Roberto and Isabel are still in Phoenix, and they've become the grandparents to Sophia's children that Diego could never have been. Their first grandchild, my first grandchild, is named Carmen, not after me, officially, but we all know the truth. Little Carmen is 6 years old now, bilingual and brilliant and absolutely fearless in the way that children who grow up knowing they're unconditionally loved tend to be. Their second child, Roberto Jr., is 3 and has inherited his grandfather's gift for building things and his grandmother's talent for reading people's true natures. Last week, he informed me that my neighbor's new boyfriend was not nice based on a 30-second interaction over the fence. He was right. The man was arrested 2 days later for domestic violence against his previous girlfriend. Sometimes the ability to spot predators skips a generation, but clearly it runs in our chosen family. Elena is still in Tucson, still watching her crime shows and dispensing unsolicited but accurate advice to anyone who'll listen. She's 83 now and sharper than most people half her age. She takes full credit for encouraging me to trust my gut about Diego, and I let her because she's earned the right to say I told you so. "You know what your problem was before," she told me recently. "You were too polite. Too worried about what people would think. Too afraid of being wrong." She's right, of course. The woman I was before Diego, before that Easter dinner that changed everything, was someone who avoided confrontation, who gave people the benefit of the doubt even when her instincts screamed warnings, who prioritized being nice over being effective. That woman couldn't have saved Sophia. That woman would have smiled politely through dinner, made excuses for her unease, and watched her daughter disappear into an abusive marriage without ever finding the courage to intervene. I'm grateful to that woman for raising Sophia to be strong and independent. But I'm even more grateful to the woman I became when push came to shove, strategic, ruthless when necessary, and absolutely unwilling to let anyone harm my child. The Rivera method, as the FBI still calls it, has been used in over 300 cases now. They've refined it, systematized it, turned my desperate improvisation into actual training protocols. Last year, they asked me to speak at the academy, which was surreal beyond description. Standing in front of a room full of young federal agents, explaining how to use family relationships and cultural knowledge to build criminal cases, I felt like I was living someone else's life. But when I saw the engagement in their faces, the way they took notes on every detail, I understood that what had started as one grandmother's protective fury had become something larger and more important. The documentary about our case has been viewed over 5 million times online. It's been translated into 12 languages and is used by immigration services around the world to help families recognize and report marriage fraud. Carmen Delgado, the producer, told me it's had more impact than any other film she's made. But the impact I'm most proud of is smaller and more personal. It's the letters I still receive from women who found the courage to leave bad relationships after hearing our story. It's the mothers who learned to investigate their instincts instead of dismissing them. It's the families who stood up to predators because they saw that victory was possible. 3 months ago, I received a letter that perfectly captured why all of this mattered. It was from a young woman named Ashley in Michigan, whose boyfriend had been pressuring her to marry him quickly so he could get his immigration status resolved. Dear Mrs. Rivera, I saw your documentary last night and it saved my life. My boyfriend David has been doing everything you described. Isolating me from friends, controlling our money, pushing for a fast wedding. Yesterday he got angry when I mentioned wanting a prenup and said things about me that sounded exactly like what Diego said about Sophia. But here's the thing. Because I knew what to look for, I've been documenting everything for months. Phone calls, text messages, conversations with my family. When I confronted him last night with evidence of his lies, he confessed to everything. He's already married to someone else. He's been running this same scam on 3 different women. I'm 23 years old. Without your example, I might have wasted years of my life on this man. Instead, I'm turning him into ICE tomorrow and starting over with my eyes wide open. Thank you for showing me that being suspicious isn't the same as being paranoid. Sometimes it's just being smart. Love and gratitude. Ashley. Letters like Ashley's arrive every few weeks, reminding me that the best revenge really is preventing other people from becoming victims in the first place. Each one represents a life saved, a family protected, a predator stopped before he could complete his damage. Diego, for his part, served his full 12 years and was deported again in 2019. According to my contacts at ICE, he's living in Medellin now, working in construction and keeping a low profile. His criminal record makes it impossible for him to get visas to travel, so he's effectively trapped in Colombia for the rest of his life. I don't think about him often anymore. He was a chapter in our story, not the whole book. And the book we've written since then, Sophia and I, Roberto and Isabel, all the families we've helped along the way, is so much richer and more meaningful than anything he could have taken from us. But I did think about him last month, when Sophia called with news that felt like the final punctuation mark on our decade-long story. "Mom," she said, and I could hear barely contained excitement in her voice, "I have something to tell you, and you're going to love this." I was gardening again, because some things never change. My roses were in full spring bloom, just like they'd been all those years ago when this whole adventure began. Diego's network, the one we helped uncover, they're finally going to trial for the RICO charges. RICO. Racketeering. The kind of federal prosecution reserved for organized crime syndicates and major criminal enterprises. How many people are involved? I asked. 43 defendants across 6 states. They estimate the network defrauded over 800 victims out of more than $12 million. $12 million. 800 victims. All because one man thought he could manipulate one woman and her mother would be too polite to stop him. The prosecutors want you to testify, Sophia continued. Not about Diego specifically. Your case already did its job there. But about the methodology, the pattern recognition, the way these schemes work. They want the jury to understand how systematic and predatory this kind of fraud really is. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. When do they need me? So next month, at the age of 79, I'll be flying to Miami to testify in federal court against a criminal organization that Diego helped create. I'll tell a jury of 12 strangers about Easter dinner 10 years ago, about Spanish lessons and recording devices, about what it means to love someone enough to become dangerous on their behalf. It feels like coming full circle, in the most satisfying way possible. But the real full circle happened last week, when little Carmen, Sophia's daughter, my granddaughter, was playing in my garden while I weeded around the rose bushes. "Abuela," she said in the matter-of-fact way that 6-year-olds have of asking profound questions, "Mama says you're a hero. What makes someone a hero?" I stopped weeding and looked at this remarkable little girl, this product of love and second chances and the strength that comes from surviving terrible things. "Heroes aren't people who aren't afraid," I told her. "Heroes are people who do the right thing even when they're scared. Even when it's hard. Even when it might not work." She nodded seriously, processing this information. "Were you scared when you helped Mama?" "Terrified," I admitted. "I was afraid I was wrong, afraid I'd make things worse, afraid I'd lose your Mama forever if I interfered." "But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway." She smiled then, that brilliant smile that lights up everything around it. "I want to be that kind of hero when I grow up." Looking at her, this fierce, intelligent, loved little girl who will grow up knowing that the women in her family don't accept victimization, who will never doubt that someone will fight for her if she needs fighting for. I felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't even realized was still unsettled. This was why it had all been worth it. Not just to save Sophia, though that would have been enough. Not just to stop Diego, though he deserved stopping. But to create a legacy of women who refuse to be diminished, who trust their instincts, who understand that love sometimes requires courage and courage sometimes requires becoming someone you never thought you could be. As I write this, sitting in the same kitchen where I once plotted a criminal's downfall, I can hear Sophia in the living room reading bedtime stories to little Carmen and Roberto Jr. Their voices blend together in the comfortable rhythm of family, punctuated by children's laughter and the sound of pages turning. This is what victory looks like, I've learned. Not the dramatic moment of revelation, not the satisfying sound of handcuffs clicking, not even the validation of seeing justice served. Victory is this: ordinary Tuesday evenings filled with the people you fought to protect, living lives so full and happy and secure that they've almost forgotten they needed protecting at all. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, if you've laughed and cried and cheered along with the Rivera family's journey from victimization to victory, then you understand something important about the world we live in. There are predators out there, absolutely. People who will try to take advantage of kindness, trust, and love. But there are also people willing to fight back. There are families who refuse to be destroyed. There are women who will learn Spanish and buy recording equipment and become exactly as ruthless as they need to be to protect the people who matter most. The question isn't whether you'll ever face someone like Diego. The question is, when that moment comes, who will you choose to become? I chose to become someone my daughter could count on. Someone my grandchildren will be proud to call family. Someone who looks like a harmless old woman tending her roses, but who remembers exactly what it felt like to bring down a criminal enterprise with nothing but courage, determination, and perfectly seasoned carnators. That's not a bad legacy for one lifetime. And I'm not done building it yet. But that's a story for another day. For now, I'm going to go join my family in the living room, maybe make some hot chocolate, and listen to more bedtime stories. Because sometimes the most radical act of all is simply living well, loving freely, and refusing to let anyone else write the ending to your story. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Thank you for believing that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have to. And remember, trust your instincts, document everything, and never underestimate the power of a woman who has had enough. The roses in my garden are blooming again this spring, more beautiful than ever. And I'm still here to tend them, stronger and wiser and more dangerous than anyone gives me credit for. Just the way I like it. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Domestic abuse, financial exploitation, and immigration fraud are real problems affecting real families. But they're not insurmountable problems, especially when we support each other and refuse to suffer in silence. Trust your instincts. Document everything. And remember that love, real love, sometimes requires becoming someone you never thought you could be. Stay strong. Stay smart. And never, ever underestimate the power of a woman who has decided she's had enough.